The Adventure of the Invisible Empire, being an account from the recently recovered papers of John H. Watson, M.D., late of the Army Medical Department, concerning certain events in the autumn of 1894. That Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard burst into our chambers at Baker Street, with a ledger clutched beneath his arm, and an expression of such mingled bewilderment and urgency as I had seldom observed upon his features. My friend Sherlock Holmes had spent the better part of the evening in one of his contemplative moods, seated in his armchair, with his violin laid across his knees, though he had not drawn the bow for some minutes. The firelight played upon his lean, ascetic face, and I knew from long experience that his mind was engaged upon some problem of his own devising, for he had spoken scarcely a word since our modest dinner. The abrupt arrival of our visitor roused him at once. He set aside the instrument and regarded Lestrade with that peculiar intensity which signified his fullest attention. "Inspector," said he, rising to greet him, "you bring more than the evening's fog upon your coat. Pray, sit down and tell us what has occurred to rob Scotland Yard of its customary equanimity." Lestrade removed his bowler and wiped the moisture from his brow, though whether from the damp air or from agitation I could not immediately determine. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I confess I am at a loss. We have had a death in the city, and while the circumstances point to natural causes, there are elements which defy ordinary explanation." "Natural causes rarely bring inspectors to Baker Street at this hour," observed Holmes, settling back into his chair and steepling his fingers. "Pray, be precise. Who is deceased? And under what conditions was the body discovered?" "Sir Reginald Ainsworth," replied Lestrade, "a senior official with the Board of Trade. He was found this evening by his secretary in his office near Threadneedle Street. The door was locked from within, there were no signs of struggle, and the physician who attended pronounced it a failure of the heart." "Then wherein lies the mystery?" I ventured. Lestrade drew a long breath and opened the ledger he had carried. "Two particulars, Doctor. The first is this marking upon his chest." He produced a photographic plate from within the book and handed it to Holmes. "The surgeon who examined the body observed what appears to be a brand or emblem, a compass device, seemingly impressed through the fabric of his shirt and onto the skin itself." Holmes held the photograph to the lamplight, his grey eyes narrowing. "Curious indeed. And the second particular?" "The ledger was found upon his desk, open to the first page." Lestrade turned the volume toward us. The leather binding was aged, but well preserved, and upon the spine was embossed in faded gilt, "Board of Trade, Founders' Meeting, 1783. Holmes took the book and began to examine it with that methodical care which characterized all his investigations. He turned the pages slowly, holding several to the light, and even brought his lens from his waistcoat pocket to study the binding and end papers. "Remarkable," he murmured at length. "Inspector, you say this was found open upon his desk?" "Yes, Mr. Holmes, open to the first page, as if he had been reading it." "And yet," said Holmes, closing the volume with a soft snap, "there is nothing to read. Observe, Watson." He handed me the ledger. I opened it and saw at once what he meant. The pages were present. Good quality laid paper, slightly yellowed with age. But they were entirely blank. Or rather, not quite blank, for here and there I could discern the faint ghosts of text, as though something had been written and then carefully erased or removed. "Several pages have been excised," said Holmes. "You will note the irregularity in the binding here and here. The stub of cut paper remains. Someone has removed portions of this document with considerable care. And relatively recently, judging by the freshness of the cuts." "But why?" asked Lestrade. "And what connection can this have to Ainsworth's death?" "That," replied Holmes, "is precisely what we must determine. You said the door was locked from within?" "Yes. The secretary, a Miss Eliza Trent, became concerned when Sir Reginald failed to respond to her knock at 6:30. She summoned the building porter, who forced the lock. They found him collapsed near the heating register, quite dead." Holmes rose and reached for his coat. "Then let us examine the scene without delay. Watson, if you would be so good as to accompany us. Your medical observations may prove invaluable." I required no further invitation. Within minutes we had secured a cab and were rattling through the fog-shrouded streets toward the city. The ancient heart of London's commerce lay quiet at this hour, the great edifices of finance and trade looming like temples in the mist. Our destination proved to be a modest but respectable building on a narrow lane adjacent to Threadneedle Street itself, the province of the Bank of England. A constable stood guard at the entrance, and Lestrade's credentials secured our admission. We climbed 2 flights of worn stone stairs to a corridor, lined with doors bearing brass nameplates. Sir Reginald's office was at the far end, and even from the threshold I could perceive that it was the chamber of a man of methodical habits and considerable responsibility. The room was perhaps 15 feet square, dominated by a substantial desk of oak, behind which sat a leather chair of the sort favoured by government officials. 2 tall windows looked out upon the lane below, their curtains now drawn against the night. A small coal fire burned in the grate, and beside it stood a cast-iron heating register connected to the building's central system. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes of trade regulations, parliamentary reports, and legal references. Upon the desk lay papers in neat stacks, an inkstand, a blotter, and a small wooden box. Holmes ignored all of this for the moment, and knelt instead by the heating register, where, Lestrade informed us, the body had been found. He produced his lens and examined the floor with minute attention, even going so far as to collect several particles in a piece of paper which he folded carefully and placed in his pocketbook. "The body has been removed to the morgue?" he inquired. "Yes, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Carruthers of Guy's Hospital performed a preliminary examination and found no external injuries, save for the curious marking I showed you." "I should like to speak with him tomorrow. Now, Watson, your turn." Holmes gestured toward the desk. "What do you make of that small box?" I approached and examined the item he indicated. It was an elegant snuff box of polished wood, with silver hinges, monogrammed with the initials R.A. I opened it carefully. Within was a small quantity of a brownish powder, finely ground, with a faintly sweet and acrid odour. "Snuff, certainly," I said, "though the scent is somewhat unusual. There is an underlying note that I cannot quite place, something bitter." Holmes took the box from me and held it close to his aquiline nose, inhaling deeply. "Excellent, Watson. You detect what the casual observer would miss. This is not merely tobacco and lavender. There is another component, subtle but unmistakable." He closed the box and pocketed it. I shall require a more detailed analysis, but I believe I can already hazard a guess as to its nature." "Poison?" I asked, startled. "Possibly, but let us not leap to conclusions." He turned his attention now to the desk itself, examining the blotter with his lens. The blotter was of the usual sort, a sheet of absorbent paper held in a leather frame, much marked with the random impressions of correspondence. "Lestrade," said Holmes suddenly, "do you have a stick of graphite about you?" The inspector produced a pencil from his pocket, and Holmes, breaking off the lead, began to rub it gently across the surface of the blotter. As he worked, faint mirror images of writing began to emerge, the ghostly traces of words impressed through the sheets above. I leaned closer and could make out fragmentary phrases: transatlantic loan, founders meeting, 1783, Penhurst, and shoot, Reeves, Bank of England Archives. "Capital!" exclaimed Holmes, his eyes alight with that peculiar fire which animated him at such moments. "Here we have the thread. Sir Reginald was corresponding regarding matters connected to that very ledger, and the date is consistent, 1783. The American Revolution concluded that year with the Treaty of Paris. Financial arrangements between Britain and the new United States would have been of considerable delicacy." "But what has this to do with his death?" persisted Lestrade. "Everything, I suspect. Now, where is this secretary who discovered the body?" Miss Eliza Trent was summoned from an adjoining office where she had been waiting. She proved to be a woman of perhaps 35 years, plainly but neatly dressed, with keen grey eyes that suggested an intelligence not always found in such positions. She answered Holmes's questions with admirable composure. "Miss Trent," said Holmes, "I understand you discovered Sir Reginald this evening. Can you tell me when you last saw him alive?" "At approximately 4 o'clock, Mr. Holmes. I brought him his afternoon correspondence and inquired whether he required anything further. He said he expected a visitor shortly and would not need me after 5. "Did he name this visitor?" "No, sir, but I did observe a gentleman arrive at 4:30. I was working in the outer office and admitted him myself." "Can you describe him?" "Certainly. He was perhaps 50 years of age, of middling height, quite thin, with spectacles and a somewhat stooped posture. He carried a portfolio of documents. He gave his name as Mr. Nathaniel Reeves and said he came from the archives of the Bank of England." Holmes and I exchanged a glance. "And how long did Mr. Reeves remain?" "Perhaps a quarter of an hour. When he departed, I asked Sir Reginald if he would need me to stay late, and he replied that he would be leaving himself within the hour. He had, he said, matters to consider before an important meeting scheduled for tomorrow at Downing Street." "Did he appear agitated or unwell?" "Not agitated, sir, but he did seem preoccupied. Grave, I should say, as though he bore some heavy concern." "One final question, Miss Trent. Do you know if Sir Reginald habitually used snuff?" "Oh, yes, sir. He was quite addicted to it, I fear. He kept his box always upon his desk and partook of it frequently, particularly when engaged in demanding work." Holmes thanked her and turned back to Lestrade. "I believe we have learned all we can here for the present. Tomorrow I shall wish to interview Dr. Carruthers and this Mr. Reeves at the bank. In the meantime, I suggest you make inquiries regarding Sir Reginald's activities over the past fortnight. Any unusual correspondence, any changes in his habits or associations. Do you suspect foul play, Mr. Holmes?" "I suspect," replied Holmes carefully, "that Sir Reginald Ainsworth died neither by accident nor by the ordinary course of nature. But I must gather more evidence before I can state with certainty the mechanism of his death. We emerged once more into the fog-laden night, and Holmes was silent during our return to Baker Street, wrapped in that profound abstraction which I knew better than to interrupt. It was only when we had regained our chambers and he had filled his pipe and settled before the fire that he spoke again. "Watson, what do you know of the East India Company?" The question startled me. "The trading company? I know it was dissolved some years ago, 1874, I believe, after the Crown assumed direct control of India following the mutiny." "Quite so. One of the most powerful commercial entities in history, invested with extraordinary privileges by the Crown, including the right to maintain armies and conduct diplomacy. At its height, the company effectively ruled vast territories and populations. Its influence upon British policy, both foreign and domestic, was profound. But what connection can it have to our present case? Perhaps none. Perhaps everything. Consider the date, Watson. 1783. The company was then at the zenith of its power. The American colonies had just won their independence, and there would have been considerable financial chaos. British merchants and investors who had held colonial interests suddenly found themselves dealing with a foreign government. Loans, bonds, trading privileges, all would have required renegotiation. You believe this founders' meeting in the Ledger pertains to such arrangements? I believe someone wished to prevent Sir Reginald from revealing what that meeting entailed. The removed pages likely contain details that, in the wrong hands, or perhaps I should say, in the right hands, might prove embarrassing or dangerous to certain interests even now, more than a century later. But surely, Holmes, ancient financial arrangements can have little bearing on present affairs. My friend smiled thinly. Can they not? Consider, if certain instruments of debt or certain trading privileges were established in perpetuity, they might continue to exert influence to this day. Old money, Watson, is often the deepest rooted, and old secrets die hard. He drew upon his pipe and regarded the fire. Tomorrow we shall visit Dr. Carruthers and learn more about that curious marking upon Sir Reginald's chest. For there lies another mystery. You observed the photograph, the compass device. It appeared to be a brand, burned or pressed into the flesh. And yet I observed something which I believe Lestrade's photographer did not capture. What was that? The image was reversed, Watson. A mirror impression, as though it had been transferred from some stamp or seal while the ink was still wet, pressed against the skin and cloth by heat and pressure. But how? Patience. First, let us eliminate the impossible. Then we shall see what remains. The following morning brought no relief from the autumn gloom. Holmes was abroad early, and I joined him for a modest breakfast before we set out once more. Our first call was upon Dr. Carruthers at Guy's Hospital, where that worthy physician received us in his consulting room overlooking the Thames. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," said he, shaking our hands. "Inspector Lestrade wired ahead that you would be calling. I confess the case of Sir Reginald Ainsworth has troubled me. The circumstances are most unusual. I should be grateful if you would describe your findings in detail," said Holmes. Dr. Carruthers retrieved a folder from his desk. The deceased was a man of 58 years, in generally sound health, though perhaps somewhat corpulent. I found no evidence of violence, no injuries, no signs of struggle. The cause of death appeared to be cardiac failure. The heart simply stopped. Were there any chemical analyses performed? The standard tests, yes. No common poisons detected. No alcohol in significant quantity. However, he paused and opened the folder to reveal a photograph identical to the one Lestrade had shown us. This marking is extraordinarily puzzling. Upon first examination, I took it to be a burn of some kind, as though a heated object bearing this compass design had been pressed to his chest. But closer inspection revealed anomalies. Such as, I prompted. The burn shows no blistering, no destruction of tissue. It is, in fact, not a burn at all, but rather a staining of the skin and fabric. The coloration is superficial, consistent with an ink or dye of some kind. Moreover, as Mr. Holmes has already noted, the image is reversed, mirror fashion. Holmes leaned forward with interest. And the positioning! The man was found collapsed near a heating register, I am told. The marking is centered upon his chest, over the heart, in such a manner as to suggest he fell forward or pressed himself against something while the substance was still wet. Precisely my own conclusion, said Holmes. Dr. Carruthers, I have brought with me a sample which I should like you to analyse, if you would be so good. He produced Sir Reginald's snuff box. Could you test this substance for the presence of any cardiac agents, particularly digitalis? The physician's eyebrows rose. Digitalis? You suspect poisoning by foxglove. I suspect that Sir Reginald's heart did not fail of its own accord. Digitalis, in sufficient quantity, can induce fatal arrhythmia, particularly in a man of sedentary habits. And it possesses a characteristic bitterness which might be masked by the aromatics of snuff. I shall conduct the test at once, said Carruthers, taking the box. If you will return this afternoon, I should have results for you. We thanked him and departed. Holmes was in excellent spirits. That restless energy which characterized him when upon the scent now fully awakened. Capital, Watson. The net begins to close. Now let us visit the Bank of England and make the acquaintance of Mr. Nathaniel Reeves. The great edifice of the bank, that fortress of British finance, loomed before us in Threadneedle Street like a temple of Mammon. Through Lestrade's offices, Holmes had secured permission to visit the archives, and we were conducted deep into the building's interior, past counting rooms and vaults, down staircases that seemed to descend into the very bowels of the earth, until at last we came to a vast chamber lined with shelves and cabinets containing the records of centuries. Mr. Nathaniel Reeves, the chief archivist, proved to be a man precisely as Miss Trent had described him. Thin, stooped, bespectacled, with the pallor of one who labours always by lamplight. He received us in a small office adjacent to the main archive, his manner courteous but reserved. Mr. Holmes, said he, I am at your service, though I confess I am bewildered by this tragedy. Sir Reginald was a most respectable gentleman. I cannot fathom what you might hope to learn from me. I understand you visited him yesterday afternoon at his request and delivered to him certain archival materials. That is correct. He had written to me some days prior, inquiring about documents related to the period following the American Revolution, specifically financial instruments and agreements dating to 1783. It is not unusual for Board of Trade officials to research historical precedents. And what did you provide him? The ledger of which you speak, the record of a meeting held in that year. It is, I confess, one of our more obscure holdings, rarely consulted. Did you examine the ledger before delivering it? Reeves hesitated fractionally. I glanced through it, yes, as is my custom, to ensure the document was in good order. And were any pages missing? Another pause, longer this time. I could not say with certainty, Mr. Holmes. The archive is vast, and not all materials have been catalogued with modern rigour. Holmes regarded him steadily. Mr. Reeves, I have seen the ledger. Several pages have been removed, carefully cut from the binding. Did you notice this when you retrieved it? The archivist's face coloured slightly. If pages were missing, it occurred before my tenure. I cannot account for the completeness of every document in our possession. I understand. Tell me, Mr. Reeves, do you belong to any fraternal or charitable organisations? A lodge, perhaps? The question seemed to take Reeves aback. That is a personal matter, Mr. Holmes. I ask only because the compass device is often associated with such organisations. I thought you might have knowledge of its significance. I have no knowledge of any such device, said Reeves stiffly. Now, gentlemen, I must return to my duties. The archives do not order themselves. We were shown out, and Holmes said nothing until we had gained the street once more. Then he chuckled softly. An uncomfortable witness, Watson. He knows more than he admits. Did you observe how he touched his watch chain when I mentioned fraternal organisations? And he hesitated before stating the pages were missing prior to his tenure. I think Mr. Reeves bears watching. You believe he removed the pages? Possibly, or he knows who did. But let us not theorise ahead of our data. We have one more call to make before returning to Dr. Carruthers. Holmes hailed a cab and gave an address in a narrow lane near the bank. We alighted before a respectable building of Georgian vintage, distinguished by a brass plate beside the door bearing the inscription, "The Lodge of St. George, Charitable Foundation, estimated 1767. A Masonic lodge? I inquired. Perhaps, or something very like it. I made inquiries this morning at Somerset House. This organisation maintains a peculiar status. It is registered as a charitable trust, but its activities are opaque. Its membership includes several prominent figures in finance and government. I believe we shall find it instructive. We were admitted by a porter and shown to a reception hall of modest proportions but considerable dignity. The walls were panelled in dark wood and hung with portraits of past masters and allegorical paintings of a vaguely mystical character. Upon a sideboard stood various ceremonial objects, a compass and square, an hourglass, and, most significantly, a rubber stamp lying beside an ink pad. Holmes examined the stamp with his lens. The design was identical to the marking upon Sir Reginald's chest. A compass with extended legs, surrounded by a border of arcane symbols. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "The ink is of a particular formulation, oak gall and iron, unless I am much mistaken. A very permanent ink, used in official documents. And see here," he indicated the pad. "It has been used recently." The impression is still slightly moist. A voice spoke from the doorway. "May I assist you, gentlemen?" We turned to find a man of perhaps 60 years, tall and distinguished, with iron grey hair and the bearing of one accustomed to authority. He wore a suit of impeccable cut and carried himself with that particular confidence that speaks of old wealth and assured position. "I am Lord Penhurst," said he. "I serve as master of this lodge, and you, unless I am mistaken, are Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Your reputations precede you." Holmes bowed slightly. "Your lordship is well informed. We are investigating the death of Sir Reginald Ainsworth. I believe he may have had connections to your organisation. Indeed he did, said Penhurst smoothly. A most regrettable loss. Sir Reginald was a member of long standing, a man of probity and discretion. I was shocked to hear of his passing. Were you aware that he had been researching certain historical matters, specifically financial arrangements dating to 1783? I was not privy to his professional concerns, Mr. Holmes. Sir Reginald was, as I said, discreet. And yet this stamp, Holmes indicated the object on the sideboard, bears a design found upon Sir Reginald's person at the time of his death. Surely that strikes you as significant. Lord Penhurst's expression remained impassive. Our lodge uses that device in its official correspondence and certifications. Many members possess documents bearing such a mark. I can hardly be expected to account for its presence in any particular circumstance. No doubt, said Holmes dryly. Tell me, your lordship, what is the purpose of this lodge? Its charitable activities appear quite limited, judging by the public records. We are a private association, Mr. Holmes, dedicated to the mutual support of our members and the preservation of certain traditions. We are not obliged to justify our existence to every curious investigator. Even when that investigator is acting on behalf of Scotland Yard in a case of suspicious death. Penhurst's eyes hardened. If you have questions of a legal nature, I suggest you consult my solicitors. Good day, gentlemen. We were shown to the door with unmistakable finality. Once outside, Holmes lit a cigarette and stood for a moment regarding the building's facade. A very cool customer, our Lord Penhurst. He revealed nothing and yet confirmed much. That stamp was used recently, Watson, perhaps within the last day or two. And the manner in which Sir Reginald died suggests a connection. I begin to perceive the outline of this affair, though much remains obscure. You believe Penhurst involved in the murder? I believe Penhurst is protecting something, an institution, a secret, perhaps both. Come, let us return to Dr. Carruthers and see what his analysis has revealed. The physician received us with grave countenance. Mr. Holmes, your suspicions were well founded. The snuff contains a significant admixture of digitalis, sufficient to cause cardiac arrest in a man of Sir Reginald's constitution, particularly if taken repeatedly over several hours. Could death have been accidental? Perhaps the substance was added medicinally. I think not. The concentration is far too great for therapeutic use. Moreover, the digitalis is mixed thoroughly with the snuff, suggesting deliberate preparation. I can only conclude that this was murder. Holmes nodded slowly. I thank you, Doctor. Your analysis confirms my theory. Now we must determine who had access to that snuff box and opportunity to tamper with its contents. As we departed Guy's Hospital, I put to Holmes the obvious question. Surely Reeves is our man. He visited Sir Reginald. He had access to the office. But did he have access to the snuff box? Holmes interrupted. That is the question. Miss Trent said Reeves remained only a quarter of an hour. Would that have sufficed to tamper with the snuff unobserved? Particularly when Sir Reginald was in the room. I think not. No, Watson. The poison was administered before Reeves's visit, perhaps days before. Digitalis does not act instantly. It accumulates in the system, particularly in the heart muscle. Sir Reginald may have been dosing himself with it, all unknowing, for a week or more. Then we must discover who had such prolonged access to his office. Precisely. And I believe the answer lies not in your office, but in the question of why he was researching those archival materials. What secrets did that ledger contain? What threat did Sir Reginald pose that warranted his murder? Holmes fell silent again, and I knew he was assembling the pieces of this intricate puzzle. We returned to Baker Street, where Holmes spent the remainder of the evening in his chemical corner, conducting experiments with samples he had collected. I occupied myself with the afternoon papers and an account of recent military developments in Sudan. But my mind kept returning to the case at hand. It was nearly 10 o'clock when Holmes emerged from his labours and threw himself into his chair with an exclamation of satisfaction. "Excellent! The evidence is now complete. Tomorrow, Watson, I believe we shall conclude this affair. But tonight I must consult with someone whose knowledge of government and finance far exceeds my own." "Mycroft?" I asked. "Precisely. I have sent him a wire. We shall visit him at the Diogenes Club." The Diogenes Club, that peculiar institution founded by my friend's brother and others of similarly unsociable disposition, occupied a dignified building in Pall Mall. Its rules forbade conversation in any room save the stranger's room, and it was there that we found Mycroft Holmes ensconced in a leather armchair, his massive form filling it entirely, a glass of port at his elbow. "Sherlock," he rumbled, nodding to us both. "Watson, I received your wire. You are looking into the Ainsworth matter, I collect?" "I am, and I believe you can shed light upon certain aspects of it." Mycroft's heavy-lidded eyes regarded his brother with that peculiar acuity which suggested a mind of formidable power operating behind an indolent exterior. "I can tell you only what is already known within certain circles of government. Sir Reginald had been conducting an inquiry at the request of the Treasury into historical financial instruments that might still carry legal weight. There was concern that certain obligations dating from the Revolutionary period, bonds, trading privileges, and the like, might be invoked by parties seeking to embarrass the government or to extract concessions. And what did his inquiry reveal? That is where matters become delicate. Sir Reginald discovered evidence that a private entity, a successor of sorts to the old East India Company, had maintained certain instruments in perpetuity. These instruments granted extraordinary privileges, trading monopolies, rights to settle accounts in gold rather than currency, even certain diplomatic immunities. "The Honourable Company," said Holmes. Mycroft raised an eyebrow. "You know of it?" "I am learning. Go on." "The organisation exists in the shadows between public and private, between commerce and government. Its members include some of the most powerful men in finance and politics, both here and in America. They do not advertise themselves, but their influence is considerable. Sir Reginald's inquiry threatened to expose the extent of that influence and certain questionable practices, such as the manipulation of currency exchanges, the use of diplomatic channels for private profit, perhaps even the forgery of government securities. Sir Reginald was preparing a report for the Prime Minister. I believe he intended to recommend a full parliamentary inquiry." Holmes leaned back and steepled his fingers, and certain parties found this prospect unacceptable. "Quite. I should add, Sherlock, that this is a matter of considerable sensitivity. The Foreign Office is involved, as is the Treasury. Any investigation must be conducted with the utmost discretion. I have no interest in causing diplomatic incidents, Mycroft. I seek only to identify Sir Reginald's murderer and to see justice done. Justice, repeated Mycroft, heavily, a noble sentiment. But justice must sometimes bow to necessity. If your investigation leads where I believe it may lead, you will find yourself confronting men who are, officially speaking, beyond reach. No man is beyond the reach of the law. In theory, no. In practice. Mycroft shrugged his massive shoulders. I can tell you this much. If you require evidence, you might examine a certain warehouse on the Surrey side of the Thames, near Rotherhithe. It is owned by a trust linked to Lord Penhurst. I have reason to believe it has been used for purposes related to this matter. You have been conducting your own inquiry. I observe, Sherlock, it is my function. I do not, however, act, save in the most indirect fashion. You, on the other hand, have no such constraints. Do what you must. But be warned, you are contending with an empire of sorts. Invisible, but no less real for that. We took our leave shortly thereafter, and Holmes was thoughtful as we walked back toward Baker Street through the late-night streets. Mycroft has given us the final piece, said he at length. Tomorrow we shall visit that warehouse. I suspect we shall find there the proof of how Sir Reginald's murder was accomplished, and perhaps more besides. The following afternoon found us, in company with Lestrade, making our way through the narrow lanes of Rotherhithe. The warehouse Mycroft had identified stood near the river, a substantial brick structure of 3 stories, its windows shuttered, bearing no sign or marking to indicate its purpose. Lestrade had obtained a warrant, and we entered without difficulty. The ground floor was given over to storage, crates and barrels stacked in orderly rows, all apparently legitimate goods. Tea, spices, textiles. But Holmes led us immediately to a staircase at the rear and up to the 2nd floor. Here we found a scene of recent abandonment. Tables stood arranged as though for clerical work, and upon them lay various items. Sheets of blank paper of the same quality as that in the ledger we had examined. Bottles of ink, that same oak gall formulation Holmes had identified at the lodge. And most significantly, a collection of rubber stamps and seals. Holmes examined these items with mounting excitement. Observe, gentlemen. Here is our workshop. These stamps duplicate various government and institutional seals. And here, he held up a document to the light, is a proof copy of an American bearer bond, dated 1783, purporting to be issued by the Continental Congress. A magnificent forgery, I must say. The paper is authentic period stock, likely removed from old ledgers, and the printing is of the highest quality. But what was the purpose? Asked Lestrade. Why forge century-old documents? To create negotiable instruments based upon the historical precedents Sir Reginald was researching. Imagine, Inspector, if one could produce documents appearing to show that certain debts or privileges were established in perpetuity, and if those documents could be introduced into the proper channels, they might be honoured by banks or governments before their fraudulent nature was discovered. The profits would be substantial, and the confusion they might cause would be greater still. But surely any such forgery would eventually be detected. Eventually, yes, but in the interim, much damage could be done. More to the point, the very existence of such documents, even if suspected to be false, would raise questions about the legitimate historical instruments. It is a sophisticated form of confidence trickery, conducted on an international scale. Holmes moved to a cabinet and opened its drawers. Within were files of correspondence, and he began to examine these with close attention. After some minutes, he extracted a small bundle of letters and handed them to me. "Read these, Watson. I think you will find them illuminating." The letters were addressed to Lord Penhurst and signed by various parties, including Nathaniel Reeves. They discussed in guarded language the Historical Documents Project and the need to secure the discretion of certain officials. One letter, dated a fortnight prior, mentioned Sir Reginald by name. "Ainsworth has become problematic. His inquiry proceeds too deep. R must apply the necessary pressure to ensure his cooperation. If cooperation cannot be secured, alternative measures must be considered." "Good Lord," I breathed. "This is effectively a confession." "Of conspiracy, certainly," said Holmes, "but not yet of murder. For that, we require one additional element." He moved to another table, upon which sat a small wooden case. Opening it, he revealed a collection of vials and bottles. "Ah, just as I suspected. Here is your digitalis, Inspector. Purchased, I note from this receipt, from an apothecary in Cheapside. And see this notation: for preparation of special inks, concentrated extract. A clever fiction. The substance was almost certainly introduced into Sir Reginald's snuff. But how? Who had access?" Holmes smiled thinly. "That, I confess, required some deduction. Sir Reginald kept his snuff-box always upon his desk, according to Miss Trent. But consider, Reeves visited him, bearing the ledger. That ledger was old, dusty from archive storage. Sir Reginald would naturally have wished to examine it carefully, turning pages, perhaps even making notes. His hands would have become soiled with the dust of ages. What more natural than to refresh himself with snuff afterward? But what if the ledger's pages had been prepared in advance, dusted with powdered digitalis, carefully applied so as to be absorbed through the skin, and, more crucially, transferred to the snuff-box when Sir Reginald handled it? I stared at him. "You mean Reeves poisoned the ledger itself?" "I believe so. It would require only a small amount of the drug, applied to certain pages that Sir Reginald would be certain to handle. Each time he subsequently used his snuff, he would ingest more of the poison. The accumulation over several hours would prove fatal, particularly if he had been working strenuously, as he apparently was, near a source of heat which would increase his heart rate and exacerbate the drug's effects." "But the stamp upon his chest, how came that there?" "Ah, that was the final touch. Perhaps inadvertent, perhaps deliberate. Sir Reginald had papers upon his desk, including correspondence from the lodge, bearing their official stamp. When he collapsed near the heating register, one of these documents was pressed against his chest. The ink, still slightly damp and heated by the register, transferred through his shirt to his skin. The effect was dramatic and suggested ritual murder, occult associations. In fact, it was merely an accident of circumstances, but one which served to obscure the true cause of death." Lestrade shook his head in wonder. "It's diabolical, Mr. Holmes. But can we prove it? We have the materials here, the correspondence, the digitalis, the connection to Reeves and Penhurst. We have Dr. Carruthers' analysis of the snuff. We have opportunity and motive. I believe, Inspector, that a jury would find the case compelling." "Then we must arrest them at once." Holmes held up a hand. "Patience! Before we act, we must ensure that all involved are accounted for. I suggest we repair to Lord Penhurst's residence and confront him with our evidence. If he implicates Reeves, we shall have a confession. If not, we shall arrest them both and let the courts determine the matter." Lord Penhurst maintained a substantial house in Belgravia, and it was there that we presented ourselves that evening. The butler who answered our knock appeared somewhat flustered, but admitted us when Lestrade produced his warrant. We found Penhurst in his library, a room of considerable elegance, lined with leather-bound volumes. He rose as we entered, his expression one of cold displeasure. "Mr. Holmes, Inspector, this is an outrage." "By what right do you invade my home?" "By the right of law, your lordship," said Lestrade grimly. "We have evidence connecting you to the murder of Sir Reginald Ainsworth." "Preposterous. I have already stated that I have no connection to Sir Reginald's professional activities." Holmes stepped forward, laying upon Penhurst's desk the letters we had recovered from the warehouse. "These documents suggest otherwise. You were aware of Sir Reginald's inquiry. You regarded him as a threat. You conspired with Nathaniel Reeves to silence him." Penhurst glanced at the letters, and something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or a reassessment of his position. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, becoming almost conversational. "Mr. Holmes, you are a man of intelligence. Surely you understand that the world operates according to principles more complex than simple right and wrong. The honourable company exists to maintain stability, to preserve relationships that are essential to commerce and diplomacy. Sir Reginald threatened to upset delicate balances. His report would have caused unnecessary turmoil. And for that he deserved to die? I did not say that. I say only that actions were taken to protect vital interests. As for the specifics," he paused, regarding Holmes with a curious intensity. "I confess I do not know precisely how the matter was handled. Reeves assured me he would manage the situation. I did not inquire as to methods. You hired him to commit murder and claim ignorance of the means. I hired him to secure Sir Reginald's cooperation. If Reeves exceeded his mandate—" Penhurst spread his hands. "I am as shocked as you, Mr. Holmes. It was a masterful performance, I had to admit. The great man betrayed by an overzealous subordinate." But Holmes was unmoved. "Your lordship, I have examined the evidence most carefully. The digitalis was purchased through accounts controlled by the trust that operates your warehouse. The correspondence found there includes letters in your own hand. You may disclaim knowledge of specifics, but you cannot disclaim responsibility. The law regards you as equally culpable." Penhurst's facade cracked slightly. "The law is a blunt instrument, Mr. Holmes. It cannot comprehend the necessities of statecraft. There are men in the highest offices of government who understand what the honourable company represents. Your investigation will proceed only so far as they permit. Perhaps, but murder is murder, regardless of the political context. And I have gathered sufficient evidence to bring you before a magistrate." Lestrade stepped forward with handcuffs. "Lord Penhurst, I am arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder. You need not say anything." At that moment, there came a knock at the library door, and the butler entered bearing a card upon a salver. Penhurst glanced at it and smiled thinly. "It seems you have a visitor, Mr. Holmes. A gentleman from Whitehall." The visitor proved to be a severe-looking man of middle age, who introduced himself as Sir Edmund Carstairs from the Foreign Office. He nodded briefly to us and then addressed Lestrade. "Inspector, I must ask you to delay any arrest. This matter has implications beyond the criminal courts. Lord Penhurst will remain under house supervision while a full inquiry is conducted. I have the authority of the Home Secretary in this regard." Lestrade looked to Holmes, who shrugged fractionally. "You see how it is, Watson. The invisible empire protects its own." "Not quite, Mr. Holmes," said Sir Edmund. "Justice will be done, I assure you. But it will be done quietly, without the circus of a public trial. Lord Penhurst will resign from all his positions. His assets will be placed under government control. And Nathaniel Reeves, I am informed, has already been taken into custody. He will face charges of murder and will stand trial, though not perhaps with all the details of this conspiracy made public." "And if I object?" asked Holmes. "You will not," said Mycroft Holmes's voice from the doorway. We turned to find him standing there, larger and more imposing than ever in the lamplight. "You will not, Sherlock, because you are not a fool. You have unmasked the murderer. Reeves will hang for his crime. The honourable company will be dismantled, its activities curtailed. Is that not sufficient?" Holmes regarded his brother for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "It must be, I suppose. Though I confess the outcome troubles me." "Justice often troubles those who seek it absolutely," said Mycroft. "But perfect justice is as rare as perfect anything in this imperfect world. Come, let us leave these gentlemen to their arrangements. Your work here is done." We departed Penhurst's house and made our way through the dark streets of London. None of us spoke until we had reached Baker Street and settled once more into our familiar chairs before the fire. "Well, Watson," said Holmes at length, filling his pipe, "what do you make of our adventure?" "I confess I am dissatisfied," I replied. "Penhurst escapes true punishment, while Reeves, who was merely his instrument, will pay the full price. So it often is when men of power commit crimes. They insulate themselves through subordinates and plausible denial. The law can reach only so far into the halls of privilege." He drew upon his pipe and gazed into the flames. "And yet, perhaps Mycroft is right. The conspiracy is broken. Sir Reginald's report will be completed by others. The worst abuses will be prevented. Is that not something? It is not justice. No, but it is what passes for justice in a world governed not by principles, but by pragmatism. An empire of ledgers, Watson, older than kings, more durable than law. One battles it with such tools as one possesses, or one does not battle it at all." He fell silent, and I knew the case had left its mark upon him, as indeed it had upon me. The murder had been solved, the mechanism revealed, the guilty identified. And yet the resolution brought no satisfaction, only a melancholy awareness of how the world truly operates. Some weeks later, I learned that Nathaniel Reeves had been tried for murder at the Old Bailey. The evidence presented was limited to his administration of the digitalis and his motive, financial gain through service to unnamed parties. He was convicted and hanged. Lord Penhurst was not mentioned at the trial. He had, as Sir Edmund promised, resigned his positions and retired to his country estate. The honourable company ceased its operations, its members dispersing like fog before morning sun. As for the ledger and what secrets it might have contained, those pages were never recovered. Perhaps they were destroyed. Perhaps they remain somewhere, waiting for another inquiring mind to disturb them. I have set down this account many years after the events described, at a time when all the principals save myself are dead. Perhaps now, in a new century, these truths may be told without the risk of diplomatic incident or political crisis. Perhaps not. I leave it to my readers to judge. What remains beyond doubt is this: Sherlock Holmes solved the murder of Sir Reginald Ainsworth through brilliance of observation and deduction. That the solution led to uncomfortable truths about the nature of power and justice does not diminish his achievement. It merely reminds us that not all victories are complete, and not all truths are comfortable. And sometimes, the greatest mysteries are not those of how crimes are committed, but why the guilty so often escape the full measure of their deserving. J.H.W., London, 1924.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this content, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support helps us provide more free resources for you.